my video, to my radio.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I am Jeremy Lessie, founder of Pixel Fest, and welcome back to another episode of the Pixel Cast. Tonight is a special episode. I want to talk about Kickstarter. I want to talk about the release of the Swapfire comic book, and as you can see in the upper right corner there, Vince is going to be speaking with us today. So that's Vince White. He is the comic book guru that helped put the Swapfire comic book together. He is the creator of the Will Power series of comic books, as well as the Powerverse. So how are you doing tonight, Vince?
I am hanging in there. I'm having a great time thus far, and I'm excited to talk about the Kickstarter, Swapfire, anything comic book and game related, and also kick it with you.
Heck yeah, man! It's always fun when we get to chat, isn't it? We get onto some crazy topics sometimes too. So we'll see where this adventure takes us tonight.
I'm open for it, man. I'm ready to go.
All right. So one of the things that I mentioned there was the Powerverse, and so your role with the Powerverse, you created this whole thing, but it's also a lot of other creators that are involved in that, right?
Yeah, when I was coming up with the idea for the Powerverse, I was looking out upon the indie market, and I saw that there's a lot of creators outside the normal big three of comics, and those big three would be like Marvel, DC, and Image. And there's a talented group of people who make these great, creative indie comics. And some of them go on to success, and some of them just atrophy, and they just fall into obscurity. One indie comic that blew up that a lot of people may have not known was the indie comic was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes.
The Walking Dead was an indie comic book.
Oh, that I didn't know. I knew about the Turtles. I actually just read Game Over for the 6th time. Actually, I'm at the end of it. It's a book about Nintendo and the creation of the video game industry, but there's a segment of the book that talks about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and how, was it Laird and what were the guys' names?
Larson and Laird. I don't know.
But yeah, it talks about how pivotal they were for Konami and how the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles turned into $1 billion business in a matter of just a couple of years, which is pretty incredible. So,
and so you have all this talent, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are great IPs out there, but they're not really seen. And the reason why they are not seen, I would boil it down to one thing: brand power. And what these big guys have that these indies don't have is this huge catalog of characters and this huge universe, this mythos. Because really, at the end of the day, you and I, you're a game creator. I'm a comic book creator, but we're content creators. And in essence, what we're doing is we're actually creating sort of universes of fiction.
Right.
And people love to suspend their belief for a moment, and they want to dive into a universe. And so I said, what if we pulled all these indie artists and creators together, and we shared a universe? Now you have a huge portfolio of characters with continuity, and my skills as a graphic designer, I would polish up some of their logos and get their books looking as crisp and clean, as professional as I can.
Yeah, like this one that I'm looking at right in front of me. It's a prime example.
Oh yeah, exactly, right. and that's the idea of the Powerverse. So that's all it is.
Yeah, I love what you've done with it though. And how many independent creators are a part of the Powerverse?
At one point we were like exploding, at the seams. It was almost like 21 titles.
Oh wow.
Some of these guys have gone off into their own universes, and now some of them are actually coming back to do more collaborations. So like I said, it fluctuates, and I guess that's true for any big comic book companies that one year they might have 20 titles, but then some titles die, or some titles, take a hiatus, and next year they might have 10.
Right. Well, and since these are all independent creators, they're in control of these IPs. They put their IP together, come together for collaboration, and they're free to break apart, do whatever they want at any time.
Exactly, and I put some stipulations in there a little bit.
Okay.
I wasn't allowing people just to go and freely come because I really love that idea.
Right.
But yeah, we changed some things up, so you have to have some commitment for a small amount of time, but nothing that's going to be overbearing or anything like that.
Right.
And at least we try to do it in spirit, like hey, let's try to support each other in spirit.
Yeah, it's tough with indies, and how do you come up with some type of structure or governance that gives the indies a boost while at the same time letting them be creative? I mean, independent, right? That's the word I was looking for. Obviously, they want to be creative, but how do you allow them to have independence while getting a little boost from some collectivism, but not too much? And I think that's something that I think about constantly on the game side, and it's something that I hope to do something valuable with through Pixel Fest at some point in time. So it could be something interesting to see a little bit how you put the Powerverse together and what the incentives were and stuff like that. But I'm sure that's a tricky balancing act.
Actually, I think the PV, which is short for Powerverse, is probably one of the best setups there is. And as you try to compare the two platforms, man, I think that could be done in gaming as well.
Yeah.
The PV. I don't want to talk too much about this, but I don't want to dominate the topic with this, but the PV is set up as multiple dimensions.
Right.
And so, comics, they go over the top with their storylines sometimes, and so the Fantastic Four might face some, universal destructive power, right?
Yeah.
But the next guy with his book, he's doing an alley vigilante. He doesn't want the universe to be blown up, so just to go along with the other book's continuity, right? So the idea that, hey, your book is in your universe and this other book is in his universe, but the Powerverse is a multiverse. And so the stories are told from this perspective of these cosmic beings that look down and they say, well, let's look into this time or this dimension at this time. And so therefore, you get to tell your book or your story with complete autonomy, complete control, right? And you don't have to worry about dealing with anyone else's continuity. And therefore, the books are also linked via these jump gates, which we call Weaver gates.
There is a Weaver gate in the Swapfire comic book. I saw what you did there. I slipped
it in.
Which,
so it could be, jump over to the Powerverse whenever you want it. Right?
Now, of course, in Swapfire, we're talking about simple teleportation within one universe. Well, at least that's the cover story, or that's the sort of at the skin. When it's skin deep, just the base principle, of course, of Swapfire is that when you shoot an opponent, you switch positions. And so this company, RQI, has this teleportation technology that they're using. A lot of people are afraid to use it, of course. They're trying to sell it to consumers. So the RQI comes up with this game show called Swapfire that shows teenage contestants using it so that it's like, oh, look, it's perfectly safe and harmless. These kids are going around playing these games. It's almost like a sci-fi new age Double Dare or something like that.
Do you think that would be real if we actually created teleportation technology? Do you think they would do something like, would people be so ready to use it? Would there be some hesitance?
Oh, I think there'd be some hesitance. So a lot of my writing over the past, and some of my writing is unreleased. I actually spoke to a couple of the books that I wrote on the last episode that were, one's a technical, book, a tech book on making iPhone games. And then another one was like a metaphysical book called Life is a Vector, which I might have shared that with you at some point. I can't remember if I ever showed that to you. I know I shared the philosophy with you. I don't know if I ever showed the picture book, but I think that another book that I was writing that was going to be a novel. It was going to be called, because I'm still working on it, Faith in Technology. And so the point is that at a certain age or place in one's life, I think people really embrace whatever the new stuff is when you're young. And you hit a point at which you get older and you're no longer comfortable with the technology, and potentially the technology becomes so crazy and alien that to the species as a whole it might it might go beyond where they're comfortable. I don't know. That's
Crazy that happens, and that's why I think Swap Fire, the concept, is really cool, because it does make sense that a company creates this technology and it wants us to use it in mass, but they know people would be like leery of it.
Yeah.
And so they come up with this concept of creating like a games that uses this technology to broadcast it. That I think that would really happen. I think that would really happen.
It made sense to me. I mean, certainly as it pertained to the game, it was more of an excuse for the gameplay, but I was, of course, trying to come up with something, that seemed within the realm of plausible. Like, hey, it's a weird technology. If somebody came and showed you this today, would you actually allow yourself to be, vaporized and moved from one place to another? If you go back and watch Star Trek, of course, there are episodes, especially in the Next Generation, where there are people that are uncomfortable with using the teleporting system that they have, the transporter. And so, they foresaw it when they did that. So I think that it's very plausible that people would be afraid to use a technology like this. They would be uncomfortable. It brings all sorts of questions into the light. It's like, if I move my body, is my soul still attached to my body? What happens? It gets a little uncomfortable. So I think it still makes sense to me. I like the story, the general concept that I came up with for the game, the explanation as to why it exists. Of course, the comic, I think, goes a lot deeper than what the original plot was for the game. So
that's awesome. It makes me wonder about when planes came out. People were afraid of flying,
right?
And it makes Swap Fire sort of makes me think of like the aerial shows and like the air, acrobatics and stuff, to sort of make people get sort of used to the idea of planes.
Maybe even movies like Howard Hughes, right? He produced Hell's Angel. Was it Hell's Angels? Was that the name of his movie that he produced?
You're going too far back for me.
So I think Howard Hughes, before, have you ever watched The Aviator, which was a fantastic movie? I think Scorsese did it, if I remember correctly. Did you watch that?
I've seen bits and pieces. It had Leonardo DiCaprio in it.
Yeah. So he was playing Howard Hughes, which if you come into the Marvel universe and you watch Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man, of course we know from the media over the last decade that Elon Musk was definitely part of the inspiration for Tony Stark's character in the new Marvel Cinematic Universe. But when I watched the first Iron Man and Elon Musk, I knew who Elon Musk was, but he was not as well known as he was after Tesla went public and all that. So it's like I knew who he was. I knew he had SpaceX and Tesla, but he was still sort of under the radar in 2008. So my mind immediately went back to Howard Hughes. So I'm sure that as much as Elon Musk was an inspiration for the modern Tony Stark, that Howard Hughes also was. So Howard Hughes did a lot of different things as an entrepreneur. He created movies, he created airplanes, he flew himself, he crashed airplanes, and The Aviator covers all of that. So he's a pretty, I'm trying to think of like a sort of bigger than life, persona. It was a real person. And certainly it seems like there was a lot of that type of work that they had to do to get people flying. That was part of what he did back then, because he created Pan Am, right? So was it Pan Am, or I'm trying to think of the airline that he created. I think he created Pan Am.
Well, the same is true for like online banking, cell phones,
just using the internet. Oh.
Yeah.
I saw the funniest video, maybe, I'm trying to think, within the last year, I think, and it was a safety precaution video from either the Virginia Beach Public Library, where they were telling people in the library to make sure that they cover up their keyboard when they're typing their passwords, and as a security measure, so nobody would steal your passwords, which, of course, anybody that knows anything about coding, hacking or anything today, of course, you're not really looking to guess somebody's password or to like look over their shoulder and get it. I mean, you could do it, but for the most part, any sort of hacking like that is done brute force with a computer. You're just running as many hashes as you can looking for the combination or. I don't want to give away a bunch of hacking things. You can go look this up if you want, but some of the things people do is they'll go through the database.
Stuff like that.
If somebody dumps a database, they'll find all the hashes that are the same, right? Because your password, it should be stored in a format that's not the native password. It should be, the password with a salt that's hashed, and then that hash will just be, a 32 character key or longer that just represents. It represents your password, and there's an algorithm to get there, but it's not reversible. But one of the things people will do is they'll find all the ones that are the same, and then they'll figure out what the common denominator is, and then they'll have all those people's passwords and stuff. But it's very seldom is it somebody looking over your shoulder to get your password. So it was just kind of quaint. It was a kind of a quaint thing from like the early '90s.
Yeah. And you're giving me like tons of ideas. Or like SwapFire, not nefarious ideas, but for like SwapFire, the story concept. I'm looking at it from the comic book end.
Right.
And like, someone's stealing your password, right? And if I know you can explain this, better to the listeners how the swap technology works, but I'm assuming that once you're going through this like quantum exchange or entanglement or switching places,
right,
that it's happening via tech, and therefore they're tracking it, and therefore that switch is given some unique identifier, and someone hacks that.
I like where you're going with this. Yeah, for sure.
In a quantum state. Oh, I got your husband.
It makes total sense. And you know what? This actually, I want to jump in for a second and go back in the news. During the Pixelcast, maybe before the holidays, I was doing some news, and I was speaking to the Oculus Quest. And actually, I was watching a baseball game using even Microsoft's mixed reality headset. I wanted to watch the World Series. And when I was in there, in the 360 video, I was standing next to a woman, and her phone was out, and it was being picked up by the 360 camera. So I could look down at her phone screen, and I could read her phone. But the creepier thing than that, of course, was I realized that Microsoft or whichever platform you're using in VR is surely tracking the telemetry of the headset, where your eyes are, all of that while you're in VR. And I don't and I said, listen, I hope they're not doing that. I hope that Oculus, being owned by Facebook, is not going to start harvesting data from your VR experiences. It's a consumer product. They make money selling the product. But then, and I haven't gotten to mention this on the Pixelcast yet, like just a few days later, maybe a few weeks later, I did see a headline and an interview with Zuckerberg where he said, yeah, we're going to start harvesting data from VR experiences to improve our ad product. And I was like, that's it. I'm not getting an Oculus. I don't want to be in VR having every single, thing that I do tracked. I mean, it's, obviously we're already being tracked a tremendous amount online, but it's a little different than having your eyes tracked and your head tracked, exactly where you're looking and everything like that inside of a 360 degree experience.
I was about to say, you said oxymoron when you said Facebook and hope.
yes, no, they're going to do. I can't really have much hope in them anymore.
Well, see, now you sound like those people that would require the SwapFire games, because now you're saying I'm not going to use Oculus Rift or whatever anymore, right? Now you have to be like Massage. They're going to release the virtual games.
No, that's right. They might get me with the third Half-Life. So I was thinking I might get Half-Life Alyx, and I wanted to get a Quest because I like the fact that it's mobile, but you can also hook it up via the Oculus Link. So it seemed like a sweet deal, and maybe they'll pull me on for that. But of course, then I know everything that I do in Half-Life is going to be recorded for eternity in some Facebook server, and probably the NSA server somewhere. So I don't know. I just that's it's creepy. And then what they're going to do is they're going to take all my combat data and feed it to their bot network, so that when a real war breaks out, it's going to be totally like Terminator. And, the Terminators are going to, not only are they going to be stronger than me and faster than me and smarter than me, they're also going to know exactly what I'm going to do in a combat situation, and I'll be totally screwed.
Man. Oh, gosh. I could go off on a tangent there because something like that popped up today. If you ever have me on, you some show notes because I can go anywhere. You know our conversation. You go
No,
anywhere.
I know it.
But man, you mentioned I was playing a game today, and Apex
Right.
Legends.
You've been talking about
And
that.
they have this mode where you can do target practice,
Okay.
and they have these dummies in there that you just shoot them. Da, da, da. Then, like 2 weeks ago, the dummies would sort of move. Today, the dummies actually shoot back at you. They strategize, they dodge, they duck, they take cover. They switch weaponry. They switch weaponry on you. They're not just stuck with one gun. If you get too close, they do hand-to-hand combat with you. I played, like Call of Duty and things like that. But these guys weren't behaving like that. And I was sitting there thinking, wow, they really have an advanced AI for these bots, right? The combat AI. And then the robots that you see from what is that? Boeing and like
Oh
the dog.
gosh, the ones from Boston Dynamics.
Yes, Boston Dynamics. I said, if you took this AI and you shoved it into a robotic body, you pretty much have, your Terminator scenario right there.
Yeah. Judgment Day's coming, man. It's almost upon us.
Swap out with them.
See, so when I started to write Faith in Technology, I was way into technology, and the funny thing about the story that I was writing was that I couldn't actually see the downside to technology yet. I wasn't there yet. I was in my young 30s, just totally hopped up on technology, it's the greatest thing ever. Now I already feel differently, and it's funny because when I was writing it, my character in the story was much older than me. He was 10 years older than me, at least 10 years older, if not older than that. Maybe the character is supposed to be 15 years older than I was in reality at the time. And so I was almost projecting what I thought maybe I would be, or I was wondering if I ever would become that person. And over the last decade, I've definitely started to transition to become, somebody who's a little bit more of a Luddite, I think. And I question, technology all the time now instead of just going with it and saying, "Yay, it's great, whiz bang." On the show, I talk about the kingmaker phase of any technology. How when Facebook rolled out, they just gave you all this power for free, right? So you could build this big brand, make a lot of money. The App Store, the same thing. Any of the game consoles, or especially the really new disruptive stuff. They give you a ton of power up front, so that you can, you have a real big incentive to get involved. Even if you look at Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and stuff like that. But where's it really going? I had this experience recently in Walmart. My wife had gone shopping there, come home and said, "Oh my gosh, I forgot the jalapenos." Right? They were in a bag somewhere. Where's that bag? Can you search the car? I searched the car, can't find the bag. She says, "You know what? They must have forgotten to give me the bag. Can you take the receipt and go to the store and get my jalapenos?" So I take the receipt to the store, and I tell the customer service representative that the jalapenos, were not given to my wife. And he says, "Well, what I'm going to have to do is check the camera." So they have a camera above every register in Walmart, and they record all the bags going into the cart, all the items going into the bags, and all the bags going into the cart. So he goes in the back, and of course I can't see what he sees. So I don't know if the video was real or not, whether he found the video, whether it was accurate. But instead of taking my word for it, and the customer is always right, which is the way that we've lived with American capitalism and business over the last century, I would say.
Yeah.
He says, "No, I've got to go in the back, check the video." Goes back, checks the video, says, "No, everything went in the bag. Your jalapenos were lost somewhere between your wife going to the car and going home. They were not lost at the register. It's not our fault. You cannot have more jalapenos." And which is a real bummer because they don't carry this brand of jalapenos at the other grocery store. So it was huge loss for us. But it got me thinking though that what is going to happen? Am I now going to have to wear a camera? Those cameras that people wear around their chest that just record everything all the time?
Yep.
And
Like
then
a car,
okay, so
stuff like that.
now am I going to have to compare my camera footage to their camera footage, and then are we going to have to go to court and decide whose camera footage has a deep fake embedded in it? Like, at some point, what we come back to is we just come right back to he said, she said, or whatever. It's your word. And so why even create the technology stack to go there when, in a situation like this with Walmart, obviously they're trying to save money and whatever. My wife feels like the jalapenos were definitely lost somewhere else. She's like, I really don't feel like I lost these jalapenos, but, they say that their technology has tracked it and that, yeah. So it's.
I don't think going back to he said, she said. I think what you said. I know you were sort of tongue in cheek in it. That what you have to compare your video to my video and see who has deepfake. No, that's where it's going.
Yeah,
and it's going to get there. Your story totally blew me away because first you said there was a customer service rep at Walmart instead of a self-checkout line. I was, oh my God, they still have cashiers.
Oh yeah. Well, no, this is me having to go back to the store. So this is me going back and saying, you guys have my jalapenos.
Crazy. No, it will get that way, and I know a point I was going to try to bring up before about your Oculus Rift thing. Okay. It's just sort of like, camera systems. We were in a camera system and, you were in a visual experience, sort of. I've heard that there are contact visors, that technology exists, that there's contacts that allow you to see a visual or virtual overlay or a virtual world, depending on how deep you want to make the virtual experience.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Is that something you've heard of, or is that still something that is, just...
Well, Vince, you can't see this right now, but I'm going to put a HoloLens on my head. I just happen to have one here. And I'm just going to wear this on the show, and you can watch the video later. Oh, and it just turned on. It really bothers me that the thing turns on when you pick it up. That creeps me the heck out. So right now, I'm wearing a HoloLens, and... the HoloLens, of course, is big. It's not contact, right? But there's no reason why I'm sure somebody somewhere has a pair of contact lenses that would give me the same capability as the HoloLens I'm wearing right now. So the HoloLens, of course, projects three-dimensional volumetric holograms into your space as if the stuff is actually there. So... And yes. I've been working on these types of applications for a long time. I mean, you saw the old iOS app I did called Car way back in the day, right, where you put a car and video record it and all that. So I've been working on this stuff I think I wrote definitely one of the first semi-technical augmented reality articles for Gamasutra. It's probably almost 10 years ago now, but I've been building HoloLens apps for the last 2 years or so. And certainly, yes, that's 100% feasible. Somebody somewhere probably has some, super, even more advanced technology than the HoloLens or the Magic Leap.
Like a thin film, right, that picks up the image via some Wi-Fi. It has some receptor in there that's clear.
If it existed, it would not surprise me at all if it was in that small of a form factor. It's probably, I don't know. You might need to have some type of projector that's like a Google Glass type thing. I mean, Google Glass was very small though. Think about how small that was. So that was, and that was 10 years ago. So I'm sure somebody's probably gone on to the contact lens realm.
And if you broadcast, let's say you can interact with these three-dimensional objects, right? Although they're virtual, and on a broadcast, you can pull those two streams together and keep them all on the same screen at the same time, right? Like just on the HoloLens.
I was going to say, I write Stream SDK, right? And Stream SDK is something that I write that instantaneously streams audio, video input from one computer to another. I can control my PC with Android. I control my Android with a PC. I could control my HoloLens with a Magic Leap. It's any to any and instantaneous streaming, and I built that. So I'm sure somebody somewhere else has exactly what you're talking about.
Crazy stuff, man. Crazy stuff. I'm telling you.
You don't
know if someone's like that. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry. You see like the guys on the newscast, and they're in like a virtual set. It makes me kind of wonder, like, are the Swap Fire games real? Are they faking the SwapFire games virtually to sort of, because the technology works, but at the pace that these guys are using it, it's almost unrealistic. So they're these guys are wearing like goggles, and after the broadcast is over, you see them almost like you see them take the virtual goggles off as well.
Hey, listen, you're giving too much away about the future plotting of this comic book, all right? Oh my gosh, that would be a real trip. Well, the thing is, though, we do see them using a Weaver Gate in the comic book. We do see the swaps taking place now. There are swaps that take place that are firsthand that are not televised. So I don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting point, though. Certainly, a deep fake should be part of the plot at some point. I think it makes so much sense because as much as the novel that I was working on was about this type of stuff, SwapFire is as well. I mean, SwapFire is still about a technology that gets us excited that also has a downside, right? Like, I mean, that's, I think, at the core of the story is there. It's like, whoa, this is so cool, but at what cost, right? Like, at what cost am I going to use this cool technology,
I think that's becoming a theme of tonight's show is SwapFire really opens your eyes to, new technologies, the risk, where we are now, what we're willing to accept, where is it going to go? How do they fool us into using it? How do they make us pay for our own surveillance technology and place it in our homes with these dots and the
Oh my gosh, Vince. Oh my gosh. So here's an audience I have spoken to on the show a number of times, how conspiracy theories become a part of the conversation at most PixelFest devs meetups. And the one thing I'm going to say to this, because Vince and I are about to jump into conspiracy theory territory. So the thing is that growing up, of course, Vince and I, and a lot of creative people, of course, we loved the movies, the comic books, the video games that we played, and in every one of these mediums, there was a bad guy, there was a conspiracy theory that was true.
Yep.
It's all X-Files stuff, right? So our brains, I think, are just so saturated with this that it's almost impossible for us not to make these types of connections in reality. But let's face it, the cell phone network that we have is the world's largest command and control system ever devised, right? Am I wrong about that?
Oh no, heck no. It controls your thoughts, your behaviors. It controls your self-image.
Yep.
It tells you when to go, where to go, what the traffic is like. Traffic, what's the app?
Oh, Tunnel Traffic. Yeah.
Traffic.
You remember Tunnel Traffic? That's an app I built back in 2014 to help monitor we've got all these tunnels here in Hampton Roads. And so Tunnel Traffic is this. It shows the 4 most congested tunnels at the same time, so you could pick which path through them you want to go, and you can see the traffic at a glance. It's almost like a fuel gauge for traffic.
As Jeremy sits and admonishes.
And I know how fast every single one of you people went over those tunnels.
He admonishes the security state while he admits to adding to it.
Yeah, well, okay, so here's my thing with that, right? The other day I was having a discussion about this, and I said, okay, so of course when apps and the phones and came around, and I was one of the earliest developers on them, I was all super excited, right? I'm like, yeah, this is great, this is awesome, making some money making this stuff, whatever. And it never really hit me how much power we were given at that particular point in time. Now I'm thinking about it, I'm going, man, I was really given a lot of power. Now, I have to look at this as one of two ways, right? Either, we just live in the freest society ever to have existed. Individuals have incredible latitude, and other individuals then have incredible latitude to choose what they want to use. They know what's going on. As long as they're educated, they can make a good decision. Say, you know what? I don't want to use that because I know what it's doing, right? Like, I don't want to use Facebook because it's tracking me, etc. But the flip side to that is I said, yeah, the power that I have as a software developer for a mobile phone it's something that would make J. Edgar Hoover jealous, right? Like the amount of power that just a single developer could have if they choose to wield it. Now, personally, I'm not comfortable with it. I couldn't. I got to a point working on tunnel traffic actually where we actually did a data deal. We sold some traffic data to ODU, and I realized that where the business looked like it was going, because I was trying to make it just like a really simple advertising business, like local businesses. You're coming home from work, you want to pick up a pizza or whatever. We did a deal with Why Not Pizza for a while. And I kind of wanted to go that way. Like, listen, it's just eyeballs, checking traffic, and we'll just hook up with local restaurants and it'll be like this little ad model for business. Once I got into the data side, because I forgot how the deal came together, but basically somebody was doing traffic research at ODU. They're like, hey, we could use traffic data. Can you provide us with some traffic data? I was like, yeah, we've got a ton of traffic data. That's fine. We'll put it together. But as it was going that way, I realized that really where the business was going was to data. And then I realized I'm not really comfortable selling people's data like Mark Zuckerberg is, I guess. He wants to go so much further. He wants to go in and analyze your eyeballs and your head motions and everything you touch and feel and do in VR. And that's just so creepy to me. So I had to take a step back from it. But definitely where my mind goes now is, okay, we've been given this power that, like I said, would make J. Edgar Hoover jealous, right? And any individual software developer that knows how to put an app on an iPhone or an Android has this power. Okay, did somebody say, you know what, in order to get to the next level of power, we have to give this away. But once we give this away, what we're going to have is this incredible command and control system where every single person is carrying around this device. None of them are ever going to put it down. They're going to keep it on all the time. And yes, not only, it's been proven already that Facebook, we keep harping on Facebook. I'm sure it's more than just Facebook, but we've all read the headlines about how researchers at Facebook put in, people's news feeds, different articles to see if they could affect their emotional state. And they could, so they were already using people as guinea pigs with that. The thing that I postulate is we know that the audio and the video that comes through that screen can affect you. Really, how far of a leap is it to suggest that the radio waves themselves that are, coming and going from that device can affect you? Is that a radical leap? Because to me, that's not a big leap at all. And
no.
Right?
No, not a big leap at all. In fact, I would suggest that it's been said that Nikola Tesla, discovered some beta wave that he thought you could send signals, directly to someone's brain.
Yeah.
Although his technology was, confiscated and, we don't know for sure, but, the brain has to create some type of signal, some type of electrical pulse and, electromagnetics and, on all these fields. Who knows? Maybe that is true. We know that they have deterrent technology for crowd control where you can send out signals, it'll cause, discomfort and things like that. We know that the music industry used to have a 400 and some odd hertz tuning that they switched. I forget what it's called, but it was a non-threatening hertz, and they've changed it to this other hertz, which is more. It causes more stress in the human condition. So yeah, I of course. But you said that. You said something. I'm gonna say it. I'll let you get back to it. You were saying, will they be willing to give something away to gain something else? Yeah. In the commercial sailing industry, sales industry, that's called a loss leader. Yeah, they're willing to do that.
A loss leader. There you go. We're going to give up our J. Edgar Hoover powers so that everybody's carrying one of these. Because here's the thing, right? There are definitely CIA, I think, declassified research on this type of stuff, right? Using radio spectrum to alter mood, possibly, maybe not control somebody's mind, but certainly to influence it, right? So what we're talking about, though, is if everybody's carrying their phone around at all times, right, and you could do something like that, now you get into all sorts of crazy deep state conspiracies where anybody could become an agent of this control mechanism, this command and control structure. And there are people that are talking about how 5G can be weaponized. Now, some people say these are just straight up conspiracy theories. One of the, I think, best interviews I saw was actually just another game developer who had started a podcast. And she had on her show, I think, a former NASA scientist who's older, admittedly. And to be honest with you, it's probably one of the most boring podcasts that I'd seen. I mean, there was nothing super flashy or crazy or anything about this. It was just these two ladies sitting down and talking about the fact that these technologies are not researched properly. They're not researched well. And the scientist was saying that 5G could be weaponized. It could be used to hit somebody with a burst and give them cancer like that, right? So, then what you're talking about is somebody having a cell phone, right? They've got this thing all the time, and if some power somewhere doesn't like what they're saying, boom, you got cancer, right?
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be too far from, let's put a chemical plant in this neighborhood or close to this neighborhood, or let's put a radio tower in this neighborhood.
Right.
Or,
yeah. Well, there you go. So you're saying this has already been done, just not at the same.
It's not with the same technology. It's different technology. The same scam is still happening.
It's right. It's not as that was more coarse. This is a finer application of it, right? Is that kind of what your suggestion is?
I wouldn't even say that, because, I mean, you could almost avoid those things. Like, well, I'm not going to drink the water. I'm going to buy bottled water.
Right. Right. You can avoid this too, Vince. We just don't use our phones.
Yeah. Well, dude, you bring me to another subject. Okay, because I have fans. They buy my books. I went through the whole process. Building a website and becoming digital and online.
Yep.
And I was building my website on my desktop computer, and I was looking at it on my screen. I'm a computer guy.
Yes.
And when guys hit me up, they say, "Hey, where's your website?" I said, "Dude, what do you have? You have a desktop, or you have a phone?" I said, "No, I don't have a computer in my home." I hear that over and over and over again, where computers used to be ubiquitous. A desktop computer was what you did your online work and purchase and everything with. But no, they're using phones only, and computers in the home, which you can be detached from. You don't have to have all the exposure to the frequency and everything. No. So yeah, this is a big deal. They've moved everyone off of a desktop to purely mobile devices, where they're exposed to whatever radiation, heat, frequency. Yeah, man, it's a big deal.
And you also don't have any control from there, right? Like, if you have a desktop computer, you can do software development, real hardcore software development. You have control over what's being built. And I have to tell you, I've seen a couple of scary things that have happened even doing that, because I do some serious network programming. I do my own audio visual, encoding and all that stuff. I had an experience recently where I wanted to create a local network between two of my laptops while I was out at a remote location. And my MacBook can still create its own network, but I have a Windows 10 box, and I wanted to create my own network, and it won't let you do it unless you've got a cell connection. So already in Windows 10, they've taken away your capability to create your own local network. And it seems pretty innocuous, right? You're like, oh, okay. And then what you realize is, I said, you know what, screw it. I'm going to create the network with my MacBook, and then I'll just have my PC join it, and then I'll have my phone join it. I was actually trying to show a demo off of Stream SDK. And then what I realized was that everything would connect to my Mac just fine, any device, Android, whatever. But the PC, it wouldn't. And so there's two ways of looking at this. One, of course, is that little by little, small incremental steps, freedom within the digital realm is being taken away, right? Hey, the Microsofts of the world are saying, you know what, we don't actually want people to have that low level of control over the technology. Or maybe it's just a straight business decision. They don't want you sending files between two computers anymore. They want you to use your cloud subscription, right? So you could say there's just a business motivation for that. But more or less what I see as a developer and somebody who relies on the technology at a low level is little bits of freedom, even on my desktop, or my laptop being taken away from me. And of course that's a far cry from what you said, which is that so many people just use their phone or tablet, which is essentially a one-way mirror into the world. It gives you no control over the technology, and it literally is this one-way mirror, right? You're getting all this content. You don't know if the content's true or not. You don't know what's real or fake. It's very confusing. I think that, obviously fake news has become a huge topic for that reason. And, what do you trust? It's interesting. It's scary. I mean, quite frankly, it's scary. I think that covering it through comic books, through movies, is probably the best way to do it. Yep. Right? That's the best way to address the issue, because it's like, well, this is happening, whether you acknowledge it or not. I do love the fact, though, that we can attack these types of problems using fictional universes where the characters are kind of going through the same stuff,
The two true, I would say American art forms, but I know I would say comics and stand-up comedy.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love stand-up.
You can convey truisms through those two mediums more effectively with less criticism, and you can get down to the core. With comedy, you can do it straightforward. With comics, you use an allegory, and you can get on these topics, and what seems crazy and so far so hard to imagine, you can actually show it can be very real. It can be. Mm-hmm. You were telling me about how they incrementally crank down on stuff like that. I don't know if you remember when tablets came out.
Yep.
And everybody was crazy over tablets, and I bought my girlfriend a Galaxy Tab or Kindle Tab. I forgot what Kindle called theirs. Nooks.
The Nook was the Barnes & Noble, and the Amazon was like the Kindle Fire.
Kindle Fire, yeah, that's right. Well, all of those came out, and they didn't have cameras.
Yep. I still have a first-gen iPad with no camera on it, and I love it.
Exactly, right? And the next thing I know, they're saying, well, we're no longer going to support these. They're going to become defunct.
You got to have a camera so you can watch it all the time.
And the new ones came out with cameras. And, we're in Hampton Roads, home of, naval bases and shipyards and so forth. You cannot go onto the shipyard and work on the ships with a phone that has a camera on it.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
For a reason.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, even crazier, did you hear about that one? I actually met somebody maybe 4 or 5 years ago now on a beach. They were on family vacation, but it was a family from a town in Pennsylvania where the school system started activating the cameras on the laptops to monitor students, whether they were doing their homework or not, something like that. And the school system was actually spying on the students. It's like, if a school system can do it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, it can be done. Like I said, I write my own software, and my intention with the software is, I want to use it for games and stuff like that. But as soon as you can see that the technology is there and it's performing the task, that someone somewhere who's more unscrupulous than you are by far is going to take that technology and use it for the things that you're uncomfortable using it for. Like the things that you go, oh my gosh, I don't want to use it for that. There's somebody somewhere that's going, hey, give it to me, let me do it.
I think you should really think about what that negative aspect is storyline wise, and the whole swap fire concept. Because I'm thinking, I always think comics. I think long term, and if you find some, they're giving away this technology because ultimately they want to do this,
Yep.
I know we spoke about a few things, but this angle is similar, but but a little adjacent to it, and I think that would be very interesting to have. Now, I want to ask you a question.
All right.
Okay. I know we've been working on the Swap Fire comic, for a while, and the story really has blossomed. The characters in the book are amazing. I really like who they are and how they sort of started to come to life. It really made us think about not only the story, but you made several statements about how you looked at the game differently.
Oh yeah.
And it's a really cool platform. It's different. You did a Kickstarter, and I was always wondering, because I'm so busy over in my world. Although we talk a lot, I always don't get all the details. You did a Kickstarter, and I never really knew what the Kickstarter was for. How you were going to leverage the Kickstarter for SwapFire.
So the Kickstarter was supposed to be market validation for 757 Angels to invest in SwapFire 2 for the Nintendo Switch. That was the original intent of the Kickstarter. It was only a 2-week Kickstarter. It was funded successfully. We raised around $6,400 in 2 weeks, and that was why we did that Kickstarter. We did, it was successful. It was in 2017. For the last couple of years, been working on trying to find funding, because when we came back to 757 Angels, they said, that's great. That is market validation, because I'd already, talked to them previously. They said, hey, this looks good. We showed them how we developed the game, delivered it for Wii U. We managed to get the game up into the number 2 download slot on the store, just under The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. We did it with a free promotion, but really we just had a goal, like we want to build a player base. So we got a lot of people, we got a lot of people playing the game. So we did that. I think that showed that there was interest in it, because there are plenty of games that are free that nobody wants to play anyway. So people gave us a shot. Like I said, we were free, so it wasn't as big of a feat as being like number 2 to Zelda, but it was still big for us. Showed them all this, and they said, okay, this looks promising. Go get some more market validation. Get people spending money on the game, and then come back to us. Said, okay, we got to run a Kickstarter. Did the Kickstarter, 2 weeks, short Kickstarter, was successful, and came back to them. We tried to turn this around very quickly so that we could, really stay on a roll with what we had done with this game. And, they just, it wasn't enough for them, or they still, for whatever reason, they turned away from it. Right. So, and I think at the second time that I spoke to them, they took it to the highest levels inside of that organization, but the organization just wasn't comfortable with bringing this to their investors. And so it turned out to be a no-go there. We tried a couple of other different ways of funding the title, and basically been in our Kickstarter. We said, you know what? If we can't raise funding, we're still going to make the game anyway. It might take a little longer. It might not hit some of the loftier goals that we have. Because really what we wanted to do with SwapFire 2 was, take the engine and everything that was created for SwapFire 1, deliver better graphics, because we didn't have a real art director with SwapFire 1. I played art director. I used a lot of assets that I just sort of modified and stuff like that. Some of the assets were created from scratch. You did some, Adrian Tissot did some. So it was a mixed bag of a lot of different things, but I definitely was on playing art director. So it didn't look great. So I said, we've got to have a really good art director next time. And I got Damond Rogers to create some models for the Kickstarter, and a couple afterwards. So he's a really great artist, and he came on and did some of the 3D work based on the work that you did, by the way. So he took the comic work that you did, and then he did the 3D stuff. And so I'm trying to think. Long story short, funding, finding a way to fund it at the level. Oh, and that was the other thing. So including better visuals and real art direction, we were just going to bring it online and bring online multiplayer. So the original Game Jam game back from 2012 was an online multiplayer experience, but it was a small, just little rinky-dink thing, so it was no big deal. With SwapFire for Wii U, I wanted to make sure that what we shipped, more like an old Nintendo game, Nintendo 64 game, something like that it would always be playable, that it would not be connected to some back-end infrastructure that would eventually go down, or that there'd be a cost that we just couldn't maintain or something like that. And also, we wanted it to be couch multiplayer. So Henry Meredith and I were the two that probably worked on the game the most. I mean, most of the hours, at the keyboard were my time, but Henry had a significant impact on the game. He and I both loved playing Nintendo 64, even though we were quite a bit apart in age. But it's like I was playing Nintendo 64 with my friends in college. He was playing, with his friends in elementary school, and so that was sort of the point at which we both rotated around was the N64 generation. So Swapfire was, I called it a retro quantum. Since then, people call it neo retro when you make a new game that is sort of has an old feel. And so that's the approach that we took with the first Swapfire. And so Swapfire 2, though, is supposed to step up the graphics, step up the art direction, and get it back online. And those were sort of the promises.
Moving to Switch, and what do you think about Switch? And
All right, so I love the Switch. I'm having a good time with that system myself. I've got a PS4, I've got a Switch, I've got some of the old classics. The Switch I play by far the most. You've got new games on there, you've got retro games on there. I'm a big retro gamer these days, like to play the old stuff. But the Switch has like everything. It's multiplayer. I'm all about those multiplayer experiences where you just sit down with a friend for an hour or two and play the game. I'm not the type of person that really likes to sit by myself and play games. I do it from time to time, but that's not where I have the most fun. The most fun for me is when, three friends come over, we all sit on the couch and we play. And of course, Swapfire was created to be that. It was created to be that experience also. It's a 5-player couch multiplayer game. And so it's the game that I would have built, if I could have made a Nintendo 64 game, it's like this would have been the game, right? And it's interesting, the Kickstarter experience, because basically as we were successful and all that, and I kept trying to find ways. I'm like, okay, I'm going to fund it this way. I'm going to fund it this way. I'm going to fund it this way. And I'm working on the game in the background. There's so many little details from the first game to go back over now. The first game is what it was, and I want to work off of that engine. But there is so much to do with the narrative. There's so much to do with the mechanics to take it to the next level also. I mean, we've talked about third-person cameras. I know that recently you've been talking about, well, what if the swap wasn't like an instantaneous swap, like this continuous beam? What if it was, like rounds that hit you of energy burst? I'm imagining something that's almost like the plasma rifle in Doom, and it's like pop, 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 and then you hit somebody a certain number of times, and a meter builds up, and when it builds up, they swap. And so there's all these things to experiment with for the second game, and make sure that those mechanics come through solid, as well as knowing that the first game started a narrative. It didn't have a great deal of story, but if you were really paying attention, you would notice there was like a ton of narrative clues in there. And of course, the comic book is the first real, I think, deep dive, going into the narrative. So super excited about the comic book now. And you know what? This is the thing I'm so excited about this week, though, because the comic book, you're looking at the cover here. People that are going to watch this in video format will see the cover. And I just finally shipped this comic to all the backers. So I sent the digital version out this week, and it feels amazing to have gotten this comic book done and gotten this out to Kickstarter backers. I think it was about a year ago. I was posting new images of the game and the mechanics. I actually contacted Reggie Fils-Aimé at Nintendo to try to see if I could get approval sort of from a more top-down perspective, because I also still haven't had luck with Nintendo getting this game approved. And somebody got on the Kickstarter, though, and said, I understand that you can't twist Nintendo's arm and, just make them give you a dev kit. But what about these other Kickstarter prizes? What about, getting this comic book done, the t-shirts, et cetera, et cetera? And I was like, you know what? You are absolutely right. I cannot force funding to come through. I work on it. I cannot force Nintendo to give us a dev kit. But the one thing that I do have control over are these gifts, all these rewards that we had. And of course, the comic book here that you see was the first big. The comic book's probably the biggest thing that we have to produce. I think there's a documentary as one of the prizes that will probably be relatively time consuming as well. But the comic book, to me, was the other really deep creative endeavor that was involved in that Kickstarter. And I think when we said we were going to do a comic book originally, we were probably thinking that it would be more like what we did for Hale way back in 2012, where, the Hale comic was like a 3-page comic that we produced based on that IP. Now, of course, with Swapfire, we had, in total, with all of the little extras, it's like 28 pages. So it's I think, a fairly significant comic book, and it really gets the narrative started. But knowing that I wanted Swapfire to be a bigger IP, it was really the only way to go, was to really deep dive into where this could go. And so the comic book now, I'm super happy, getting into it, getting into this much
really
detail.
Does achieve that. It really does achieve it. You get to dive into the story of the game, and that, those two dichotomies those parallel tracks are just awesome. The fact that you have a game, the fact that you have a comic where you can get, it enriches the game. They both enrich each other.
Yep.
And it working on this was so awesome. It was one of my best pleasures. Jeremy never made a comic book before, and so like going through it with him was really fun, and him learning certain things. Oh, okay, all right, okay, oh wow, and and he is. I gotta give it to you, Jerry. You really push yourself. You are a self-made perfectionist, and it shows. We edited this book like 4 or 5 times. We wanted to make this short.
Oh, I went through it again and again and again, and I still don't know if it's really there. It's, I think it's great. I've hit a point in my career where I don't know how much, like, I just want to keep going on like perfectionism because I'm so afraid that I'll release something that will come in under expectation. And I think Swapfire the game came in under my expectations, and I pushed so hard. I mean, I pushed so hard to try to get it perfect, and I think back to it sometimes and just go, you failed. You fell short, and that's why this first game wasn't as big of a success as I wanted it to be. But it's really tough to. I think we were talking this week. We're like, you can go 99%. But to go from 99 to 100, I think it might take more work than going the first 99, whatever it is, or you can go 90%, whatever, however you want to look at that. To get across, there's like an uncanny valley of quality. To get from like it's okay to like it's great is just, and it's so much work to get to where you have anything. To go from nothing to something is a tremendous amount of work. To go from something to like meh is a lot of work. To go from mad to it's okay, tremendous amount of work. And you keep going to these levels, but to really go all the way to like, wow, this is awesome. It's almost like I still can't fathom it. I don't, and it seems so easy when you're watching other people do it, but when you go to do it, it's like.
Well, I give you, kudos to you because I don't think it was a failure. I don't think anything that you successfully bring to market, whether it sells, you brought it to market, right? It's a success, and I'll tell you why. It's like someone running for a political office. They don't have that office yet. You might be some nerdy 19-year-old who just got out of college, and you're speaking at your local gymnasium. But if you got the goods, right? If you got the stuff, they're going to be believers that see the potential, your raw potential, and what you can be, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact that you stepped up and you tried it, right? The fact that you released something, that becomes the substrate that you can then build upon slowly and slowly. And those people that were there in the beginning, they join your team, either physically or emotionally or supportively, right? And then they help spread the word. I call them mavens, right? Those are your mavens.
Mavens.
And then, all right. And then you with your next release, you push and your mavens push, and then you get those people who want to be hip, and they want to be hip to the new things that no one else knows, and they increase your audience and your support. And then your third movement is to the masses, because you have mavens, true believers, you have hipsters, and now they are all influencers on the masses. So the fact that you released that game is the reason why we're having this conversation today.
That's true, I guess.
and why there's a comic book that's really cool to read. The story is really cool. It's cooler than I thought, and it really does make you want to know what happens next.
Oh, man, 100%. Dude, I have to give you credit, man. This cover that you did, first of all, I know we edited the cover like a bajillion times also, but the thing is, you gave me a cover, in the middle of the year, in the middle of 2019, that basically was this. I mean, it was a little different. We've edited it to a point, but like the cover that you gave me, as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's magic. It's pure magic, and it was perfect. And then, you sent me another cover later on that had some different colors, and we had to tweak it up to match the first one because it was nowhere near it at first. Then we got two covers that were like sort of comparable that, it was like, man, which one am I going to go with? Because I was so in love with the first one that I almost couldn't see the second one. And
Jeremy couldn't sleep trying to figure out what to do.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't. I was going nuts trying to figure that out. And I've talked about it on the show. Now we have a cover where I feel like it's got the best of all elements. It's got. I don't know what it is about the Patch Titan head. The viewers can see Patch Titan's head here is in color. It's more of like a see-through glass instead of like a blue tinted glass. And I don't know if you were intending for him to just look more like a ghost with that, like he had a colder appearance, or what. But for some reason, for me and for a number of people have mentioned it, having where he's got the clear helmet and you can see his skin tone was important. A lot of people on the Swapfire Facebook page mentioned that the Swapfire title was getting lost in the background, so we fixed that. And that became really important to me when I started looking at thumbnails on Comixology and other comic stores. One of the things that I was pretty good at, there's a lot of things that I try to be good at, and I'm probably not that good at many of them, but one of the things I think I'm pretty good at was creating icons and for these digital storefronts. I had a lot of success on the app stores in the early days just by creating compelling icons, game titles, and descriptions, because the games that I was making really weren't that great, but I was able to garner, I think, relative to the quality of the games I was producing, a disproportionate amount of attention on those app stores. I had a couple of number one games, over 10 million downloads to my name. Games really weren't that great, but I was pretty good at sort of like the merchandising on a digital storefront. So I didn't know anything about the comic book world, of course, until like last week is when I first, really started looking at comic book stores and see, well, how does the merchandising work? And it's essentially the same as these app stores, but yeah, the title was something that was really important. I still had the old Swapfire logo there. We sort of took like 2 steps away from it to where we don't have the gradient anymore and we don't have the Swapfire icon, but now the title is something that's legible even in thumbnail format. I kind of, I did the thing where, like I said, I looked at like the Comixology, the top selling list. All those comics have titles that are easy to read. And it seemed to me that the harder the title was to read, it seemed to be lower in the charts, right? Or more obscure. And when you look at the more obscure comics, sometimes they'd have a really cool design for the text, but it was like not legible. And that seemed to affect the commercial capability of the comic.
You're selling a name, and the advice that they used to have, back in the days where people would just go into comic shops and so forth, is that your comic needed to be legible from like 6 or 7 feet away.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that people would see the title and say, oh, what's that, and so I guess the same is true even on a digital storefront.
Yeah, because you're looking at a bunch of thumbnails. You're not looking at the full size. It's not the full size of your screen. It's a tiny little thing. And if you can't read the title, it is less engaging if you can't read the title. So we solved that. Got the Patch Titan head. We took the hair. the hair. It wasn't hair. It was smoke. But we went back and forth on that a couple of times. But, man, what we have now is just beautiful. It captures the essence. And I have to give you just huge props for that because you're somebody that can read somebody's intent, I feel like, and just scale it up, with what you do. So it's like
I'm glad you noticed that. I really do try to take someone's vision and embrace it. With character design and stuff like that.
Yes.
But you mentioned Patch. This is the beauty of us working on the comic. In relationship to the game, is that Jerry laid out a storyline, like a plot synopsis.
Lex did.
Lex, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and so we really did do this the old Marvel way, where this is something Stan Lee created, and unbeknownst to I guess Lex and Jerry, they were doing it, where DC would write full scripts, right? They would write full scripts. They would hold the artist to, exact, panel composure and composition and things like that. No, they wrote out Lex and he wrote out a story synopsis. Then they let me look at it, and we went into it, and I said, well, let me turn something back to you. And I sent Jeremy these thumbnails, like real small drawings, and with pencil sketches on it, and he couldn't make heads or tails of what I was, because these things are like stick figures. I said, dude, this is happening on this page, and this is going to happen here. And only when I got to get it more solidified was he able to really see what I was talking about. But out of that, I was saying, well, hey, there's a fight scene. These guys are fighting. And I was like, hey, maybe he was saying, well, Vince, these guys look older. Because one of the concepts with SWAT Fire is that it's
teenagers. It's supposed to be teenagers, yeah.
Teenagers. And he said the guys you drew fighting or doing the SWAT Fire games in the beginning look older. And me never missing an opportunity to create something new. I said, well, maybe these are the old guys. Maybe before they went public or mainstream, just like what's that thing? The rollerblades, remember the roller derbies? The roller derby.
Yeah.
Old school roller derbies. The guys are rolling around a roller ring and fight each other. It's like wrestling on roller skates, right?
Yep.
That they use these guys, the beta leagues. We came up with the beta leagues.
Yep. And
that these guys tested the SWAT technology when it wasn't even really reliable. And these guys have been through the wars. They've swapped people into no existence. They have. They're older. They're grimy. They're gritty. And we came up with them. Like these old dogs. They're called old dogs. Whatever.
Yep.
And it added like another layer of mythos to the game, which could be explored.
Heck yeah. Well, that is the great thing about collaborative creation, right? Where you're creating together. The SWAT Fire story, it had the whole public face of it is supposed to be these young people, almost like an American Idol Double Dare, mixed with American Gladiators, but definitely young people. So that it just you go, no, well, it's got to be safe. They're letting these young people use it. And but I love the idea of the beta leagues and the older characters that use the technology, like Patch Titan that we see on Patch Titan's. You can identify him because he's got the eye patch on. But it was a fantastic way to expand on the story a little bit, and it gives us some more footing to stand upon. Because when you create a narrative at first, it generates a possibility space that's only so big. There's only so much you can do with it. And as when you have little tangents like this, of course, it gives you a little bit more possibility space to work with, and it allows the story to get, to become more rich. Of course, there's a flip side to that where on the world building side and what Lex has to do, and Lex and I have had a lot of conversations about making sure, that of course we're not going to open up so much that we've got plot holes or we've got these, logical inconsistencies in the story. And this is the first time, I've obviously had many conversations about this type of thing when I'm looking at the writing that other people do in fiction, but doing it myself, I'm going, wow, yeah, I think it is difficult to remember everything about the story. We have a wiki going for SWAT Fire, sort of on the back end, to try to make sure that as we're adding and expanding the universe, that of course we don't step into any logical inconsistencies. And even when we were working on the comic book, of course, there were a number of times that there were a number of times that you came up with something that it was like, yeah, you know what, that's okay, that still fits within the rules of the universe. There's a couple other times where we just say that's a hard stop, we can't do that, or we need something in place to signify this element of the narrative. And there's a couple of places where we had to add stuff. Yeah,
I'll put this out there. For the listeners, I want you guys to chime in on this, because I think that you never told me you had a wiki, but it makes sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll bring you in on the wiki. It's not too detailed yet, but it's necessary.
This is Jared, so of course he's got a wiki, and I say we turned that wiki into a source book
Yeah. Yep.
and a source book comic, and that it breaks down, the characters, the places, the machinery, the technology. I can provide the art, and and it has a description. I don't know. Have you ever seen like a source book, like a
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. There was like a Star Trek technical manual back in the day that I think my friends and I used to dream of having. It was very expensive at Barnes & Noble when we were kids, so none of us ever got it. But it was like, wow, somebody created a whole technical manual for like the USS Enterprise, like...
Well, for comics, it happens a lot. In fact, on Indie Planet, you can look up the Powerverse, and there's something called the Powerverse 101.
Okay.
It's free. It's a free download. You can look it up. Everybody, you guys can look it up. It's a source book, and in comics, what it is every page is basically a picture of a character. He might be like take up 2/4 of the page,
Okay.
and then it just has all his information around it.
Right.
Height, what he works with, blah blah. In my source book, I have the machinery on one page. It tells you what it is. Have all the characters, what it is, like Patch Titan, Beta Leagues, what they were. You just flip through pages. It's just a simple image with information, and it's a regular comic. Sometimes it goes 21 pages, sometimes it's less. But people eat these up, like you have the Batcave source book.
Oh yeah, I can imagine that once people are really committed to that universe and that that fiction, they're gonna want. I mean, I remember myself being that way. I mean, I would read, and like I said, I was more into video games than comics, but I had plenty of comics. But I was the type of person that would, I love Street Fighter 2. I've said that on the show so many times, still play it to this day. But I would read the book and the character bios over and over and over again if I was bored on a certain day, or I was driving in the car or something as a kid. I loved all that stuff. Yeah, they had great characters. I mean, they really weren't super deep, but they were engaging nevertheless, and it was something that I was always interested to read more about.
And this is the age. If you're looking at all the trends, you're seeing how things are going. This is the age of content. Content is king. The internet is there. The web is there for what we were talking about. What 4G, 5G.
5G. Yeah.
Looking for content.
Yep.
Looking for content, and this is just more and more content. And centered around SwapFire, which I think is a great concept. And you just want to provide people, because when I get bored too, I look at like Comics Explained, or I look at old storylines on YouTube, for like Marvel or DC.
Right.
Oh, that's cool. And people want that. And I think you have a very rich concept and story that you can create all types of content for it to boost it, and it not only hypes the fans. It hypes us.
Yeah, we get way pumped up. Yeah, we're all about it, man.
But I want to talk about something that's related to this. You were talking to me about the Powerverse and how it's all connected, about all these different creators, and how something like that might come over to the gaming platform. Let me throw this out there to you, Jeremy. You're the technical guy. What if you did that on a gaming platform? The concept with the Powerverse is multiple realities. And
yeah, I just got a vision.
Exactly. I don't know. I don't know where you are, where I am.
So what I just thought of, though, I mean, people love crossover. So yeah, you've got a whole gaming universe with Willpower, and then one of your other characters in the Powerverse is the brother, right?
Yep.
So now I don't know what the mechanics of those two different universes are, but of course people love, for example, Smash Brothers, things like that, and that's where you sort of, it's cool because you can Dragon Punch Mario using Ryu from Street Fighter 2. So it could be very interesting, especially if the mechanics are like wildly different, and then you go crisscrossing those mechanics. You take. Even if you took SwapFire and you crisscross that with Willpower's mechanics, where Willpower has all the mass of the universe contained within him, right?
Yeah.
What happens if you swap with him? What's that going to do? And then once you start talking about the cold, And once you start talking, further into the backstory, which I don't think we can really get into there. I don't think we can go into the full backstory of what's going on with the cold. But all of a sudden, this, there maybe the crossover has to happen at the end of all this. You know what I mean?
I'm gonna take it up one step further. You are thinking. You're thinking. Well, you are a master of programming and marketing and so forth. But you're talking to the Black Stanley right now. And,
yes.
and I am suggesting something completely different. What I'm saying is, the Powerverse is to promote indie comic book creators.
Right on.
So if you took that same concept and put it towards the gaming market, what I'm suggesting is that a game that you play, and on this level, I'm playing Swapfire. I get to the end of that game, I jump through a portal, and I'm in another indie creator's game. Totally different mechanics. I play that, I get to the end of that, boom, I'm in another indie creator or in another game.
Right.
And the idea is to get to the end, but the games are shuffled. You don't know what game you're going to start off on. You get your downloading screens and boom. Okay. Oh, the first game is Swapfire. You play that, get to the end. Boom. Next game is Egg Crackler.
Ooh, yeah.
All right. So and what you're doing is you're promoting all these smaller games, and they're all connected because they're all within the same game.
The Pixelverse.
Yes. Yes. And all you need to do is to reach out and talk to a couple of game creators and say, look, I have this idea where our games actually intersect. And at a certain point, I don't know if you would like an API type of thing or whatever, but that's my limited tech tech jargon.
Hey, that was good, man. API is good. There's too many people wouldn't know what that is. So.
And therefore, it would be like these game packs. Okay, imagine those game packs where you get a game pack and it has like all the classic games, Donkey Kong, whatever, right? Dig Dug. But you get to the end of the first level of Dig Dug and boom, your character slides into Donkey Kong. Same moniker, your name is.
Are you using the mechanics from Dig Dug in Donkey Kong? That's the real question. Did the mechanics cross over, or am I literally just playing different games sequentially, sort of like WarioWare?
Different games, but it's taking your avatar. So let's say your name is Complex 101.
Okay.
You're playing Dig Dug. You're Complex 101. At the end of that level, you go through the portal, zoom, going, and now you're in Donkey Kong. You're Complex 101. Got to get to this level. Boom, you get to that, you finish that level, and now you're in, the equivalent of Mario Brothers. You're still Complex 101, and you're still playing with your friends. All you guys are trying to get in. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And all you have to do is say, hey, well, you don't have to change, you're talking to the other creators. You don't have to change much of your, content or platform. All you have to do is provide a bridge and somehow allow players to go from one platform to another. And that's it. And now you the Pixelverse.
The Pixelverse, man. Well, what I'm actually getting, the only way to do it without having any sort of deep control would be to actually use something like Stream SDK, where the client is a thin client that then jumps servers. And as it's jumping servers, what you're doing is you're jumping to basically a remote controlled video game. But yeah, I can actually see something like that being created using that type of technology. And it's funny, I think about it all the time. I wanted to actually call Stream SDK like Einros or something like that at some point. I don't think the domain was actually available. So in Swapfire, the weapon, it's not really, I don't even know if you call it a weapon, but the gun is called the Einros cannon. And Einros is short for Einstein-Rosen bridge. And if you know anything about teleportation, black holes, anything like that, basically, the idea of ripping a hole in space-time was something that was derived by Einstein, Nathan Rosen, and what was the other guy? EPR paradox. Boris Podolsky. So what was that?
The Transformers used to call their gateway a Rosen bridge.
Did they? Yeah. So an Einstein-Rosen bridge is a tear in space-time. It's a portal. The first time I ever heard about it, I was writing an article. I wrote a Games Demystified article on the mechanics in Portal. So that was the second article. As a paid author, I got paid to write these demystified articles for Gamasutra back in the day. And so I wrote one on the gravity in Super Mario Galaxy, and the second one I did was on Portal. And so in order to write this article, though, I said, I'm going to do a little bit of extra research. I know the mechanics, how to write the code, whatever. I started doing a little bit more research into portals, the idea of a portal, and that's where I came across the EPR paradox and the Einstein-Rosen bridge and all that. So some of those terms were in that article, and it was kind of fascinating though. When I wrote that article, the analogy that I used is that in that game, it was sort of like jumping in one side of a water slide, and the water slide twists and turns and goes all over and then shoots out another direction. You maintain your velocity. Your velocity, of course, is the direction and the magnitude. You maintain the magnitude of your velocity, but the direction component changes. And so that was what that article was about. But yeah, long story short, though, the whole idea of teleporting is actually baked into Stream SDK also. So it was funny. I always wanted to find a way to tie those two together, but with SwapFire, of course, it's these game mechanics about teleporting, and with Stream SDK, you're literally able to teleport yourself instantaneously somewhere else, or you're actually able to teleport a game from some remote location to you. So if something like the Pixelverse were ever to be created, where we wanted to enable creators to have their mechanics all hooked together and linked together without any sort of like deep level of massage, because you know game mechanics are. I mean, you change one thing on a game and the whole thing breaks. You know what I mean? It's like it's a house of.
I think what you said.
It's a house of cards.
Yeah. I think what you said doesn't require that. That you have a thin client that is basically a loading screen. Like you jump in, some portal. You end the game in one game, and then the thin client basically shows the animation of your character going through one portal to another, and it's basically a loading screen as it switches to another server, and then boom, you pop up another person's game.
100%. We could totally build that. We just came up with a solution right now. I love how I'm able to hype all the things that we're working on. Right now, we're simultaneously hyping Pixel Fest, the Powerverse, SwapFire, and Stream SDK, and the Pixelverse, which is something we haven't even made yet, but something we'll. That's the funny thing about streaming, to totally jump into streaming. Stadia is out right now, and so people, I think, are finally understanding what this technology is. I could say, you might remember. Do you remember OnLive or Gaikai?
Online or Gaikai?
OnLive, which was ONLIVE, or Gaikai, which was GAIKAI.
No.
Okay, so nobody remembers those. So in around 2010, although I think they were shown earlier. I think the first time anybody showed OnLive publicly was maybe at GDC 2007. The idea of streaming a game in real time from one location to another, where it was fast enough that you could play it, was done then. So the idea for Google Stadia is, it started with them, and OnLive is the one that kicked it off. Gaikai got rolling shortly thereafter. They might have been working on their tech at the same time, sort of in secret. Gaikai got sold to Sony for $400 million and is now what you know as PS Now. That is Gaikai. So Sony has their streaming platform, and now, of course, we see Google has Stadia. I wrote an article, it's almost 2 years ago now, where I proposed that there was so much more that we could do with streaming, though, than just taking the content and throwing it on a server so that I can play it on multiple platforms. And of course, not only that, but it's like it's the CFO's wet dream, if you will, with regard to digital rights management and everything, right? Because now none of the game content is accessible on the client. You know what I mean? There's none of the IP. All the IP is housed on a server somewhere. So I think, from a corporate perspective, people love that business model, As far as players go, though, players, when a new technology comes around, players want something different, right? And OnLive failed. Gaikai got sold to Sony and turned into an extra little, sort of like an extra on top of the PlayStation experience. But I think most people, they're not going to do their hardcore playing on a streaming platform because there's input lag, there's video compression. You're not going to get the best experience there. I wrote this article about how we might be able to use this type of technology in other ways, right? Rather than just to stuff it all on a giant data center and charge people a subscription to use it. And I still think that there are so many ways we could use streaming, and you just came up with a new one that I hadn't even thought about yet, right? Hyperlinking different games and mechanics together. I mean, that's a concept for streaming, that you could only really do that using a streaming platform. So you just came up with a whole new concept, and I'm gonna have to go add that to my database. I've got a database of sort of like value propositions as to why this technology is important, other than just giving more power to Google, basically. I wrote that article though like 2 years ago, and then Stadia was announced like a year later, like 9 months later, and I was like, I was sitting here saying nobody's doing anything with streaming.
Like underwhelming, reviews that it didn't come out to be exactly what they thought it was. That I think you're required to have not an internet connection.
Oh, you need a ridiculous internet connection to, if you want to stream 4K, 60 frames per second, with no lag and all that. Most people have said
that's not 4K. It's not truly 4K.
Well, the video stream is 4K, but the games aren't necessarily rendered in 4K. So the developer has the choice as to how that game is going to be rendered on the server, and most of the games are still just rendered like in 1080p. Maybe even less on some games. I'm not sure, but then there's an upscaler that then takes it up to 4K. So.
Okay.
And a lot of people have said that basically when you play these games, you're going to end up playing them at like 320p. 240p, for most people.
Wow.
I can tell you from my own test, it uses a tremendous amount of bandwidth. Even when you're using video compression and all that. I mean, you can imagine the amount of data you're using. So let's get techie with it real quick here. When you have a bitmap file, the amount of memory is the pixel width times the pixel height times the bit depth, right? So if you have a 32-bit image, it uses a tremendous amount of memory. I don't really want to bust out a calculator right here, but let's do it real quick. I'll bust out my phone calculator, right?
This is why, while you're doing that, I'm going to tell everyone, this is why Jeremy keeps asking me, what's the pixel height when I'm looking at resolution and inch height, right? I'm looking at inch height, resolution. He said, no, I want to know exactly how many pixels. I was like, okay, let me.
Yeah, I always want to know pixels, and Vince is like, well, it's 300 DPI, and it's 7.5 inches by 10 inches. That's the size of a comic book, and I'm like, yeah, but how many pixels? I'm all pixels. So
now I'm getting it. Now I'm understanding.
Let's put it this way, though: a 1080p image that's in 32-bit color depth, that image is 66 megabytes. So one frame is 66 megabytes, right? So you can now, with video compression, of course, in last episode we talked about vectors. We talked about life as a vector, which is the sort of a game developer philosophy, if you will. It's a philosophy I came up with, and I feel like I came up with it because I was developing games and using vectors to solve those sorts of problems.
You wrote a book about that.
Yes. So, but imagine this. So one frame, right, if it was a bitmap image, would be 66 megabytes. Now, you want to do that at 60 frames per second. So let's say, so every second, oh man, that takes up too much space on my phone screen to even read. So what you're talking about there is 3 gigabytes per second. Now that's, of course, this is uncompressed, right? The number that I'm talking about here is, if it was just raw uncompressed data, what you're talking about is 1 second worth of 60 frame per second video would be almost 4 gigabytes, right? So it's kind of mind-blowing to do this type of work, because you have to figure out. I remember the first time I ever thought about it when I heard about OnLive, and I actually have an OnLive console. This is a technology that I've been like, wow, how did they do that? And you know what the funny thing is, Vince? I almost wrote a Games Demystified article on the video compression and it was going to be in the last issue of Game Developer Magazine, the last print issue ever. And something happened. They ran out of budget. I'm trying to remember what happened. They either ran out of budget or deadline, or they just canceled the issue. And so the article that I was working on was canceled. And then I said, okay, well, I'm just going to take the technology and put it up on the Unity Asset Store. And then when I did that, one of the guys I was working with, you might remember, it was Justin Norman.
Oh, yeah.
I was about to put the source code up there, and he's like, well, don't you think you should like protect it or something? And I was like, I don't know. I guess maybe. So I ended up, wrapping up the technology in a DLL, so it was a library, so it wasn't just like totally naked source code. And it turned out to be a pretty good deal because that building, I've been working on this for about 7 years, and it's actually turned out to be a decent business. And I'm about to release Stream SDK 3, and so I'm really excited to see where that's going to go, because this will be the first time, to my knowledge anyway, that this type of technology will be democratized, because Stream SDK 3 will be free to use for developers, so people can get in and do all sorts of just like creative things, like create something that we just described, some sort of game jumping universe where you actually have multiple virtual realities that are all hooked together in a way where they can maintain complete code independence and still hook together. And that's probably the only way you could do it. So another use case for that. Bravo, Vince. Man, you're one of those creative people I've ever met. You are definitely a genius. I got to hand it to you. You are a genius.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Man, seriously.
Man, you know what? If I had the technical training that you had, boy, I'd be dangerous. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, man.
Well, I think the same thing, but in reverse on the art. I keep thinking, man, if I was just good at art, I would be super dangerous. Same thing.
But see, that's why you make the Wonder Twins, baby. I'm telling you,
Yep.
form Wonder Twins. Yeah, man. I think that would be awesome if you could do something like that. That would be great. And as I'm sitting here thinking about it, the only thing that you would that you could worry about, or not even worry about, is like, do you carry points over? In fact, now that I think about it, no, you don't. At the end of the game, you can just do a summary of all the points or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get a total, you get a score, you see who wins. You don't have to bring the points over to the next game. Each game is independent. It's just like the Powers.
What?
Each game is completely independent. You thin client between the two. So basically a loaded screen, and boom, you jump right into the game.
No.
I'm telling you. Hold on, my dog is freaking out. Okay. Hey, no, my girlfriend's coming home. Yeah, I think that would work so well. I'm telling you, man, that might be something. And dude, I know you have this other technology. I know you have this other technology where these guys could see their faces of the players overlapping this.
Oh yeah, you could do that too. You could do that too, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the funny thing is, man, I'm chomping at the bit to get this idea out there, though. But all of a sudden, I just wanted to do a little jump back to the API, right? So if you wanted to have the scores carrying over, that's where your API would come in handy, right?
Yeah.
So now the simulations themselves are all separate, but each of those simulations can be hooked together with an API, at least to pull your score across, and that might be like the minimal thing that you do if you wanted to, or the thin client could just connect to the API and then compile all the scores together, or however you want to do it. You would need some API to get the score cohesiveness, but that would actually work. This would be very interesting to do this as an experiment. And everybody, if you're watching this, this is going to be by far the longest episode of the Pixelcast. We're at about an hour and 40 minutes. This is double the length of a relatively long Pixelcast. The last few, of course, we've done relatively short episodes, but I knew.
Are we going to wrap this up?
I was going to say, I knew that if Vince was on here, we would do something absolutely amazing. I've been trying to get him on for a couple weeks, and I bet Vince is going to be back, though. I think Vince will be back, because I know he and I have talked about doing podcasts for a long time. We knew it would be crazy if we just got together and did this. So I'm glad we finally made it happen. And, I was the one thing I just want to say, and what I was going to cover, whether Vince came on the show tonight or not, was just that as someone who's done a Kickstarter and made it successful, is definitely one of the most challenging things I've done, and it felt so good to finally dole out a Kickstarter reward, especially because SwapFire, especially SwapFire 2, it's been a great challenge. The fact, there's been to me, feels like a rejection from Nintendo. Dealing with the rejection on financing has been very, very challenging. But knowing that these backers are out there, that they supported us, they're really the first investors, and it's been tough. It's been tough, but I know that I want to deliver this game, and I want to deliver everything to those backers that I said I was going to do. And so finally getting to check the first and really one of the biggest things, other than the game, probably this is the biggest thing, reward off that list and saying, here you go, guys. Thank you so much for backing SwapFire. And I'm elated. I was elated to be able to send this comic book to the backers this week. And we've got some physical copies that we still have to send out. But man, getting that reward out there. And Vince, you've done a lot of Kickstarters too. So maybe you can speak to this in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, running a Kickstarter and having it reach, its fruition and reaching goal is a stressful thing, and you got to be dedicated to it. And, when it happens, you're like, wow, it's a confirmation. It is also a fan building platform. You realize, hey, there's people out there who want your content, and, there's so many people have done it, so many people have failed. And so, for Jared to do it, he walks into the hallowed halls of Kickstarter, and that's how I funded a lot of my comics, through Kickstarter. And
that's how we met. I was about to run a Kickstarter for the Game Jam version of SwapFire back in 2012. After I did the 7-day FPS, I had the game. I was like, this is pretty good. I think I'm going to try a Kickstarter for it. And then I was sort of checking out Kickstarter for the first time, and I saw this guy, Vince White, who had a couple of successful comic books funded on Kickstarter. At the time, they were pretty modest values. I think you were raising $300, $500 maybe for a comic book on Kickstarter back in 2012. And now, of course, I noticed over the years how you were able to scale up and do bigger and bigger, more ambitious projects. I guess you got your Mavens and you kept rolling.
Yeah, 6,000, 7,000. We last time I went over a year review, it was it was over 32,000.
Wow!
That we got, and so I was like, wow, this is amazing. Now there were some complications, and I learned a lot of lessons there because like I said, I created a universe where guys could leave. Mm-hmm. And so I learned a big lesson there. And, so what I realized is, when you create this pixel universe, because I know you will, and I know we will.
The Pixelverse is happening.
Is that, you gotta have, you gotta have something where, these guys are locked in and show their support. And I think the fans will love it. The fans want to see creators come together. They really do. They want to see crossovers. This is why you have playoffs. Fans want to see. My sports acumen is old, but they want to see like Shaquille O'Neal play with somebody else and
just say go back to Michael Jordan if you're going to go back to gender. I mean, whatever. Yeah. O'Neal was young when Jordan was playing, but they played at the same time.
Yeah, they want to see crossovers. That's all the All-Star games are. People want to see games and sports fans and comics and all these things come together. And so yeah, man, I think something like that would be awesome. And just make for sure that the people that are in it are committed and have some type of litigious connection for us.
They've got to have some skin in the game, right? There's a little skin in the game. It would be interesting with a virtual server like that. Obviously on the back end side, you'd have to make sure too that you could unplug one, and that the hole would be seamless. The wormhole would just close right back up. So.
Well, I want to do some shout outs before I go, if you don't mind.
Yeah, man.
I want to do a shout out to my boy Brody online. We play together. I want to do some shout outs to Russ Cassidy, who did the colors on Swamp Fire Comic.
Great job, Russ. I want to talk to Russ at some point.
Great job. All the Powerverse fans. I definitely want you to check out what Jared's doing, and check out the Nintendo Wii for now. The Switch is something in the future, or who knows? He might explore another platform. But my fans are definitely your fans. I invite you guys to become his fans, and who knows? Jared and I are talking about, maybe a possible Powerverse card game. Maybe a possible
we're going to be doing.
You never know.
I'm very excited about doing that.
You never know.
I think there's a lot of possibilities.
A lot of possibilities.
Oh, one thing, I did put this thing up. I did submit it to Comixology. Now, you knew I was having some trouble with Kablam. I guess I'm going to look at, I'll look at that, but hopefully, I don't know how many people, are a lot of people read on Comixology? I just don't even know with these digital storefronts on the comic book world, which ones people are using or whatever. But it's going to be up on there. It's submitted there, and hopefully it will be up on Kablam or Indie Planet. That's their store. It'll be up on Indie Planet very, very soon.
It'll be there. It's just that they've gotten so popular, it takes about 2 weeks now for them to get back to you.
Okay. So that's good to know. I think I called Vince earlier and was like, hey man, I've submitted the thing. I've emailed him because I haven't heard a response. And it did. It sounded like there's sort of a manual process going on in the background there. Yep, it's not. They're a little bit smaller. It seems like a big business, but probably the company's smaller than Amazon, which is owns Comixology.
A lot smaller. And they will contact you via email and talk to you. They'll talk to me several times on a personal basis. But they've grown in sales so much, that they're just overwhelmed.
They're busy. That's good. That's good. I like it. I think so far I'm liking the comic book world. You've made a couple of really good points about it. Thank you for bringing me, into it. I feel like you're my mentor in the comic book world now. It's like I get to take all the video game stuff and come on over, and I'm having a good time with it so far. So pulling my hair out a little bit, but at the same time, just hoping it leads somewhere. I just like seeing Swap Fire expand. Like, I've made so many things as making games, but none of the games I ever really made in the past, I don't think I ever really fell in love with any of them until I made Swap Fire. So I think Swap Fire is the one where I'm like, you know what, I love this. It's to me, it's a whole universe. It's not just the mechanic. The mechanic's intriguing. That's the starting point. But it's it's something that I feel like we can just keep building, just like we did this comic book. How it just sort of naturally expanded into all sorts of cool things. It's like, wow. So, but thank you. Thank you so much.
Next time, maybe we'll talk Halo and how it possibly crosses over.
Oh, yeah, we'll go back. Do a throwback to Halo.
Grab me on. Visit thepowerverse.com. Check me out on Facebook. And I'm sure you're going to hear me more on here,
Yes, definitely.
Until next time, be powerful.
Yes, be powerful. I love it. Thank you so much, Vince. And, of course, we have so many taglines we could throw out. But I'm just going to say, of course, you're listening to the Pixel Cast. So please, everybody, continue growing through love of games. I am Jeremy Alessi, founder of Pixel Fest. And, one other thing. We are going to be having a Pixel Fest Devs Meetup at Circuit Social in downtown Norfolk, the third Tuesday of this month, which I think is next Tuesday. So keep an eye out for that. And everybody just have a great night. Thank you again so much. Bye-bye.